Are we filming? I believe we are. Yes, we are. So welcome to another podcast. I'm not sure what number this is, but I'm going to be trying a slightly different experiment in this particular one. Okay, so it's the Flatability. It's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? The Flatability Podcast, and today I'm going to respond to comments on just one video because I've received a lot of comments. I might do this more regularly, actually, just to focus on one. And the video I'm talking about today is the one entitled "Why I Write in Capitals," or uppercase, for want of a better word. And what I've done is to help me, I've actually printed out in full the comments that I've selected for this podcast. Let me just grab a pen. This one is a TWSBI Go, and it has diamine pumpkin ink, one of my favourites. So we'll try that. So I've just printed everything out rather than writing it out, because this is slightly incongruous, isn't it? Because here I am talking about the advantages of, for me at any rate, writing in capitals, and I have reverted to printing out comments from viewers. And you can tell from the first one, this is one of the reasons why I've decided to try this, because with the best will in the world, it would just take far too long to write, to copy out in longhand everything, especially given that my writing is slow because I use capitals. But I'm going to go through these. So this is a comment from from a channel member. I'm going to start with channel members, which is fair enough, I think. And the channel member says, "Thank you for sharing. It is interesting to see how everyone deals with little issues in using our favourite writing instruments. I suffered from what is commonly called death grip." Now, I hadn't heard of death grip until this channel member talked about it. But let's see what this channel member says. Now, I'm just trying to decipher it. "I tripod grip, and I would clamp down on the pen or pencil to the point it was painful. It took me 6 months to retrain myself to hold a pen with a tripod grip, and also to relax the muscles in my fingers with a Lamy Safari." I haven't yet tried a Lamy Safari, but I'm familiar with it and the shape of it. "Once in a while, I can feel my grip tightening, but I immediately recognise it and relax my fingers. It seems to happen when I use the computer keyboard all day for work, and I switch to pen and paper later in the day. I tend to prefer cursive, but lately I have been using print lettering only for a personal project where I am transcribing whole passages into a Rhodia web notebook." Well, I fully concur with the use of a Rhodia notebook. One of my favourites. I know the shape. The Lamy Safari has a distinctive sort of three flats where you hold the pen, whereas this TWSBI Go, and for those of you listening, I'm holding up a TWSBI Go. You'll have to Google it later. This doesn't have flats. It is completely round and smooth. I never thought of it as a death grip, but I can relate to that. I remember when I was a student. I was frantically, and I'm going to digress here, as you know. So I studied in my youth electronics, not that it makes any difference. And there was this lecturer who said nothing, and we had a revolving blackboard. You know what? Can you remember those? And he just had his notes in a book that only he could see, and he was just transcribing onto the blackboard. And you had to write at such high speed that there was no possibility of digesting what he was writing at all. You had to waste your evenings trying to go over writing that inevitably was written at such speed that there was a risk that you wouldn't be able to read it when you got home, and in the evening did some homework. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. It would have been much better. And we're not talking about an era where photocopies hadn't been invented yet. He should have given us a handout of the notes for the day, and then he could have done some teaching. You know, he didn't do any teaching. And so I remember having what I now realise is a death grip. And I was using a fountain pen, an Osmoroid fountain pen, and it was getting so. I was actually, my hands were sweating. My left hand was sweating because the lactic acid was building up in my hands, and there was no possibility of learning anything. It was purely a desperate race to jot down what was being transposed onto the blackboard before it disappeared round the top as he moved it higher and higher and higher. And what a waste of my time and everybody else's time and his time, and time, UK time, I suppose. What an absolute waste. Anyway, I'll get off my cursive high horse here. I agree with this viewer that there is a need to just relax. Some people have talked. I mean, I've been looking at this over the last couple of days, and this is apparently quite a common thing. One of the solutions is to have a fatter pen, but obviously everybody's different. But I would say, there are risks. There are risks with writing. But yeah, so I guess I suffered from death grip at time. Personally, I would say, I mean, I'm giving an example here where rather than writing all this down and abbreviating it, I thought it would be fun and easier to just print it out and share it with you. I mean, all these notes are there for the public record because they are comments that you can look at on the channel. They're not hidden in any way. But I like to answer these comments on podcasts, as you know, in a more fuller way than I'd be able to otherwise. Interesting. It is an interesting subject. I must remember, I must avoid the death grip at all costs. Anyway, thank you for that comment. And thank you for anyone that provides this level of detail. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's great to have a comment that says, great video. That's good. But it's nice to when someone gives some meat on the bone, as they say in the UK, to comment. So, next comment. I write in copper, and this is also from a channel member. I write in copperplate because I went to a school that was stuck in the Victorian era until about 1960. I think your italic joined up writing is fine. I could read it as you write, even on the small screen size. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. This thing about copperplate writing and being in a school stuck in a Victorian era. I went to such a school, a parish school, small parish school, Church of England. And our headmaster was born in 1990. Sorry, not 1990, 1890. So he was coming up to the end of his tenure as a headmaster, I guess. Whenever I think of the Victorian era, I think of my ex-headmaster. And he taught us what he described as joined up writing. Now, other people describe it as cursive. I call it joined up writing, partly because of those days over 50 years ago, 55 years ago. And I remember, and for those of you listening, I'm going to try and describe this, but for those of you that are watching this, when I do joined up writing or cursive writing, I do a sort of a loop the loop like that, like a roller coaster that does loop the loop. And when I do a C, it is, as you would expect, C-shaped. But he wanted us to do E's that started off as a C, and then you had an oblique at 45 degrees across the C to make an E, which, as you can imagine, is very time consuming. But it looks neater, I suppose. And in those days, it wasn't very politically correct. And if he caught you doing the loop, you would get a rap across the knuckles with a stick. I mean, he'd be arrested now, wouldn't he? He'd be unbelievable, you know. But it probably, his teaching methods probably hadn't changed since the Victorian era. Amazing. But thank you for telling me that my cursive writing, my joined up writing, is readable. I appreciate that. I have a love-hate relationship with cursive writing, as you know. I would love to do it, and I'm pretty sure that if I wrote right to left, I'm just going to diagram. My ink has dried up. If I wrote like this, and I'm writing right to left, I'm for those of you that are listening, I'm just doing a right to left sort of pseudo joined up writing. I could probably do that really, really fast. But I just can't do it left to right. I just can't do it. But we can discuss that in detail at another time. So, next comment, which is also from a channel member. So, they say, that's funny talking about handwriting. I have been reading through my dad's travel diary he wrote back in 1963 when he went by boat from Australia. That is fantastic. To England. And then back with his parents, who were both born in England. I love those sort of stories. I find it hard in parts, but I love that he wrote in his normal handwriting. His dad, my grandpa, also wrote a trip diary, but I will try reading that next, as his writing is slightly harder to read. Unfortunately, they've both passed, so I can only check with my mum for clarifications. I'm lucky that my parents are still around, but they're not going to be around forever. I'm going to put the cap on my pen in case it dries up. I'm surprised I had to do a hard start there, but we'll see. This is a really, really good point. So this person, they've left the reading or the transcribing or the deciphering, whatever, of their grandfather's diary, which I'm sure will be very, very interesting. I mean, moving from England to Australia, I mean, that sounds fascinating. But they are leaving their grandfather's diary till last because it's harder to read. And I suppose that's a normal thing to do. But this viewer raises a really, really good point, and I'm going to have a word with my parents about this. And I've been kind of mulling over this the last 24 hours or so. I have decided, as a result of this viewer's explanation of the difficulty she has, I have decided I'm going to, obviously this isn't something that you can just come out with, but I'll have to be very, very tactful, because we are talking about asking someone. I'm going to basically ask my parents for writing samples and a key. In other words, I've written each letter at upper and lower case, both print and cursive, and I've put NB, Rosetta Stone. The beauty of the Rosetta Stone is, and I believe it's held in the British Museum at the moment, I'm not sure it will be there forever, because there are moves afoot to reclaim it. The Rosetta Stone is perhaps arguably one of those things that the British nicked and brought back to the UK, but that's for another story, another time. But I mention it because the Rosetta Stone, which I believe was dug up by Napoleon's army, I'm not quite sure, people can correct me, I haven't checked, but I think it has something to do with the Napoleonic times, and it has 3 versions of the same text in 3 different languages, and so that became very, very useful from a point of view of understanding one or more of the languages on the stone. Forgive me, my knowledge is not perfect. I have actually seen it up close. Fascinating. And it's a big thing. It's a big thing. So we are so lucky to have serendipitous discoveries like that. But there's obviously moves afoot to repatriate things that the British nicked. I think it was owned by the it was. I'm not sure, but I think we grabbed it off Napoleon's army. But I don't know the circumstances, so I'm waffling here. But basically, I'm minded to have, if they could provide me with a key of upper and lower case, capitals and cursive, that might help me in future, when the time comes, and not before, to decipher their handwriting, which is almost a mystery to me. I cannot read it. When I get a birthday card, and sometimes there's a nice little text there, it takes me ages to work out what they're trying to say. And I feel compelled to do it because obviously it's a birthday card, But from a diplomatic point of view, this is tricky. But I'm going to do that, and I wish this viewer well with her transcribing. Hope it goes well. Okay, so we're moving on to comments from the wider viewing public, and you're very, very welcome, and I thank you. This viewer has said architects and engineers tend to write in higher case. I've not heard of higher case rather than uppercase before. I wonder whether that might be something common amongst architects and engineers. I don't know. Be interesting. Let me know if that is the case. As their writing must be legible on drawings. Not so relevant now with computer-generated drawings, but old habits die hard, and I still write in higher case or capital letters when I'm doing hand-drawn sketches or writing in my journal. That's interesting. So they're writing in their journal, like I do, in capital letters, in uppercase. Fantastic. So I'm clearly not the only one. It's certainly more legible, and with many years of practice is very fast. Great video and very thought-provoking. So thank you for that. I don't know how old this person is, but as they say, old habits die hard, and I still write in higher case or capital letters. I've put here to mention Architect nib grinds of nibs. Architect nibs are available. I don't know whether architects use them. Perhaps they do. But you know that like an italic nib has a wider downstroke than the crosstroke. Well, architect nibs are the opposite of that. They have a wide crosstroke and a narrower downstroke, and I really like that. I do not have any of my pens fitted with an architect grind, but the closest I have to it is a Fude nib, Fude, which basically does the same thing. You have a broad crosstroke and a narrow downstroke, or narrower. And I'm actually going to demonstrate that, even though I shouldn't. So apologies for those of you who are listening. So this is a Fude nib. So if we just do 4 downstrokes and then 3 across, and you can instantly see what I'm talking about. Okay, so for those of you that are listening, without labouring the point, the crossstrokes are wider, broader, fatter than the downstrokes. It's the opposite of an italic nib, and I like them. I would like to try one soon, but I don't have one at the moment. Okay, next, how are we doing for time? Well, we're getting on a bit. Okay, so the viewer writes, try transferring motion from your fingertips. Lots of handwriting artists say you should write from your shoulder. I can't quite pull that off, but it helps to keep your arm free to move. Yeah, I would agree with that. I can see that. I'm experimenting here, and I'm keeping my hands still. I'm just going to put the quick writing on the paper, brown fox. Okay, and then underneath that, I'm going to move my shoulder, see whether it makes a difference. Okay. Well, I think I would need practice. I'm just trying to imagine in my mind, am I doing that self-consciously or not? Am I doing it without even realizing it? Probably a little bit. I can feel it in my shoulder. Yeah, maybe there is a little bit there. But it's probably easier, I would say, if I'm just writing right to left like this. I'm probably have more arm movement doing that. But going the other way, it's more difficult, I think. I've got the idea that if you are using your right hand and you're writing right to left, it's always going to be easier. Apart from anything, if you look at how a nib is written and you make the assumption that your writing is going to be slanting, you are essentially you're gently dragging the nib across the page. Whereas if you are writing with a left hand and you want a forward slope, a forward slant, then you are effectively ploughing into the undulations of the fibre of the page. Under a microscope, paper is very rough, and so basically you are even if you're using your shoulder, you are basically pushing, you're gouging into the paper with your pen rather than dragging it smoothly over the top of the fibres. And so there's definitely more bite, which can be a good thing or it can be a really bad thing, but inevitably you've got less control because the nib is microscopically bouncing off each fibre crossing the furrow that you're ploughing. If you take a plough behind a tractor, it's effectively dragging the plough behind it. Can you imagine trying to push a plough with a tractor? There's a risk that it's going to dig in because there's no control over the height of the plough above the soil, and so there's no possibility of moderating any tendency for the plough to dig deeper than it should. Whereas if you're towing it on a ball joint behind a plough, then you are controlling the height of the blade by virtue of the fact that you can't dig down because the height of the plough is maintained by the attachment to the tractor. I know that's not a very good example, but that's the best I have. But thank you for that. The idea of using a shoulder. I like that. Okay. Next comment. The viewer says, maybe chuckle. I worked for several years in a job where I had to decipher GP is a doctor, general practitioner, scribbles from many sources. I shall say no more. There is still very little handwriting I can't interpret, given 40 years, even 40 years later. Maybe it's just a knack. My view of doctors' handwriting is it's generally very, very poor. Now I originally joked that was a prerequisite for becoming a doctor. You must demonstrate your handwriting is on the verge of being indecipherable. But I put here a note. Receptionists make the best translators. And I would say this is my advice. And let me just clear that message on there. Okay, there we go. I had a message come up on my screen. If you get a prescription from a doctor, and just before you leave the surgery or the hospital, read it. See if you can actually read what it says. If you can't, then my advice is the best person to help you decipher what it says is the receptionist behind the desk. I'm sure they'd be happy to help you. Because sometimes if you go to a pharmacy with a prescription, certainly in the UK, there is a small risk of misinterpretation, which could be fatal. I mean, I'm over dramatising that, but it could be. So you want to make sure that it's clear, legible. So yeah, I mean, it's a as someone who has to take several medications a day, certainly in the UK, you don't generally have your own doctor. You just see whoever's available. Sadly, it's a bit of a production line. The whole system is in chaos at the moment, as you'll probably know from the news, UK news. The system is such as it is creaking at the seams, and so that is something that you should really do. Check and double check what the doctor has written. So I know I'm digressing, but there we go. It's a public service announcement from Flatability HQ there. Okay. This is another long one. Okay, now you have me. Your experiment was catchy and clear, so I just had to do it myself. And the difference was much bigger than I expected. And if you will recall from my video, basically I timed myself writing one text in cursive, joined up writing, and the same text in capital or uppercase letters. For me, the difference was 20%, so quite marginal. But this person said, writing in capitals to improve readability is complete nonsense for me. Fair enough. In school, we were not allowed to, and in high school, we didn't have the time to develop it. Well, at least I never managed it. Okay. And now writing cursive is 75% faster. That's interesting. Okay. People's mileage will vary. The difference in mine is 20%. And the difference with this viewer is 75%. And he says, he or she, I think it's a he, and just as readable, meaning unreadable on both occasions. Yours is very good, by the way. Okay, so he says his writing is not great, and he says mine's pretty good, very good. Thank you very much. I'm probably not the worst writer. I'm certainly not the best. Maybe I'm a bit in the middle. I don't know. But I feel self-conscious about my cursive handwriting, especially if I do. I can't read it. I cannot read it. Or I have difficulty reading it after I've forgotten what I've written. So if I pick something up a week later or a month later or a year later. The other reason is that writing in cursive makes me very creative. That's interesting. I'm going to mark that. And fast thinking, like Leuchtturm says, thinking by hand. I don't have that with capitals or typing. That is very, very interesting. And it's far for me to dispute that. Different people get different results. Certainly if I'm writing something, I prefer writing to typing if I'm thinking of something. So I concur with that. Absolutely. I totally agree. I've never really thought about whether cursive versus uppercase has a varying effect on my creative ability, my creativity. I'll have to think about that. I know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to when I do some writing, I will probably be thinking about that very thing. I might actually experiment and just see whether, for me, that writing in cursive boosts my creativity. I'm not sure. Who knows? But I'm going to give it a go. Okay. Next comment. That's interesting that you're not able to read your parents' handwriting. Could you give us an example from them in your next video? I apologise, but no, I'm not going to do that for privacy reasons. Curious to know if you were taught cursive in school, and if so, how long did you use cursive before transferring over to writing in capitals? Well, yes, I was taught cursive from the age of 5 by a headmaster born in 1890, as I previously mentioned, who was keen to teach us the Victorian way that he had probably been taught in, when he started school, presumably in 1895, that sort of thing. I'm not sure when I started writing in capitals. I probably just drifted along. I mean, I've got lots of notes from the past that are in capitals and in cursive. And the reason I'm mentioning cursive writing rather than joined up writing is because I've suddenly become a bit self-conscious about using the term joined up writing, but hopefully they will interchange. And they say, I'm asking because I think people who use cursive are able to read other people's cursive to a certain extent. Is there any chance you might be slightly dyslexic? It's not something that's been suggested before. And in fairness to the viewer, just to answer this, he or she says, I think people who use cursive are able to read other people's cursive to a certain extent. That might be true. I don't know. I've not actually thought about that. But I have thought. I printed this out last night, and this morning I had a look because I didn't really know in detail what the symptoms of dyslexia were. So I did a bit of research. So these are typical dyslexia symptoms. So let's just go down the list. Confuse visually similar words. Do I do that? No. Spell erratically? No. Find it hard to scan or skim text? No. Read or write slowly? Well, I can read fast, but I write slowly. So I'm just going to put a question mark there. Need to reread paragraphs to understand them? No. Find it hard to listen and maintain focus? No. Find it hard to concentrate if there are distractions? No. So I would say, from a purely self-diagnosis point of view, the answer is no, I don't suffer from dyslexia. But I do suffer from slow handwriting due to what I've mentioned in the video. But thank you for your comment. It's interesting. Next viewer says, I have written completely in capitals since my early 20s, essentially since I no longer needed to take down long notes. Let me rewrite this. And I've just diagnosed myself as not having dyslexia, where it says need to reread paragraphs to understand them. Okay, so probably I put it down to these glasses. They're not very good at this distance. I don't have any glasses that are ideal for this 2 foot distance. These glasses are ideal for this distance. And for those listening, I'm holding the filofax up 1 foot away from my nose. I have written completely in capitals since my early 20s, essentially since I no longer needed to take down long notes very quickly. I work in a family retail business and also antique paperweights. We still write out receipts for any large purchases and they are always in capitals. Fabulous. I think a lot of it is about how your mind works, and it probably suggests that you see the world from others' points of view rather than directly relating it to yourself, as you are thinking about how others will view the tasks that you do. I certainly see my desire for future legibility as important. I do not want to give grief to my descendants or random readers in the future. I do not want to give them a hard time because, and I don't see it as laziness. I can understand people enjoy writing in cursive. But this is an important point. If you are knowingly writing something that you know the future intended readers, let's say your descendants, if you are writing a journal, or if you are a budding author and you write in cursive and it's so undecipherable that when you tout your book around, they return it because they just don't have the time to spend deciphering your scribble. You have to ask yourself, and not anyone particular, but one has to ask oneself whether what you're doing is conducive to the end user having a good experience. If the answer is no, then there are three choices. Either A, don't give a monkeys, just do it anyway, and just let the decipherer have to, just accept that you're giving the future reader a hard time, but you won't be around anyway, so why care? If they really want to read it, then they have to put the effort in to actually decipher your scribble. Or you can use uppercase, or you can type it out, or you can use speech recognition software so that you can have a printout and then you manually edit some of the errors that are inevitable when you're using speech recognition software. Or you get a secretary and you dictate it to them and they write in uppercase, or they have they can do it at speed, either using a typewriter or not a typewriter these days, maybe a laptop, or they're writing in shorthand and they're doing it, but I mean, there's various ways. I mean, you wouldn't go up to Roald Dahl and say, when he was alive, and say, your children's story there we're not going to publish it, because even though we know it's going to be a bestseller, we just can't be bothered to spend all this extra time deciphering your handwriting. He used to write in pencil in the shed at the end of the garden, which I think that's fantastic, actually, with a flask of tea and probably some biscuits as well. Good for him. There's obviously a variety of options. That's what I'm saying. But if you have the time and you want to be kind to the people that are likely to read your story, your journal, whatever, then one of the options available to you is to write in a form that is legible. And at the end of the day, when people were carving that Rosetta Stone in the 3 different languages, foremost in their minds probably was the need for legibility. In fact, probably bearing in mind that you only have one crack at it if you're carving on stone, it has to be legible. Can you imagine I'm digressing here, but can you imagine if a loved one passes away and you get the gravestone, the headstone or the tombstone carved with the name of the person, and it's so illegible that no one can read it, and the carver, the headstone carver, said, yeah, but it's more convenient, I can do it a little bit faster if I write it like in this way. They wouldn't get the job, would they? So it all depends, I think, on the future need, and also the creative experience for the writer as well. If there needs to be some middle person interpreting and transcribing, well, it's not the end of the day. And also, as I'm discovering, AI can work wonders in trying to decipher dear departed scribble. I'm working on that. I have done some experiments on it as we speak this morning, and I couldn't. I logged on to. I used a free trial, and it's like getting blood out of a stone. I don't know whether it's me or whether it's them, but it was one of those trials where they say it's free, but then when you get into it, it's cleverly designed so you've got to pay. I didn't want to go that far, but as I understand it, AI is definitely being worked on in applications to do subscribing of various texts. And for instance, 14th century English, you could use that. You could type in that, and that would give you a greater degree of transcribing accuracy. So you could, medieval German, you could use that if that was the text that would most likely be suitably transcribed by that particular algorithm, if you like. So this is quite an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about until I started formulating how I was going to respond to these questions. So quite an interesting thing. Let me just see where I am, because I've digressed. Okay, here we are. The only time I ever write joined up is on cards for occasions, birthdays, Christmas, etc., which takes a lot of time, but I feel joined up writing suggests sincerity. Yeah, totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. So this is a person that essentially does the same as me. They're running a business and they need to be clear, and so they're using capitals. Good. Okay, now this one, as you can see, it's slightly greater than the capacity. I just did it like this. Okay, so this is a really interesting one. I began my career in architecture doing lettering on drawings in capital letters, or block letters as we called them. I'm just going to underline that, block letters. Notes and dimensions on building documents had to be legible, of course. It was also important that all lettering looked uniform. Now that is interesting. That is really interesting. As if it were all done by the same person. So young architects and draftsmen quickly learned the correct style, vertical and horizontal strokes. We all took pride in our lettering, and then computers and CAD, computer-aided design, came along. The ability to hand letter was no longer required. I've lost the ability to hand letter because I haven't done it in a long time, and because at 80 years old, my hand isn't as steady as it used to be. That's fantastic. I love reading this sort of thing. So thank you very much, whoever you are. Very, very interesting. Interestingly, I once knew someone who, in part, drew ordnance survey maps. And I vaguely remember, I mean, this was many years ago, back in the 80s, they were telling me that when they did certain symbols on the map, they had to be fairly uniform, so that they didn't vary from person to person. And what they said was that just sometimes, just for a little claim to fame, as it were, that only they knew about, they would do like a cliff formation to spell a word or something like that, and you wouldn't know if you looked at the map, but just occasionally these pop up. There was a word for them. They're on ordnance survey maps. I'm going to have to find out more about this. Now it sparked piqued my interest, as it were. Okay, so 80 years old, my hand isn't as steady as it used to be. That bothers me. So I got a few fountain pens, and I'm still determined to regain that skill. I've begun developing a style which may or may not include lowercase letters, and might even be a melding of cursive and block letters. Above all else, I agree with you that legibility is paramount. What a fantastic comment. This comment gets my comment of the week prize. Fantastic. So thank you very much for that. So interesting. That is so interesting and enjoyable to read. I read these comments, some of them last night and a few this morning. This one I read this morning while I was having coffee, and reading an interesting coffee like this, an interesting comment like this, actually makes my coffee taste even nicer. So thank you very much for that. I've got a few minor ones here. Minor, but still important. So I'm just going to go through them very, very quickly because we're nearly coming up to the hour. I too always write in capitals, primarily because my cursive is chicken scratch. Now, I haven't heard of that. I'm going to have to look that up. Although my capitals tend to be with a flare. That conjures up an interesting picture. Capitals with a flare. Yeah, fantastic. Someone says, I love the way you call it joined up writing, brackets, cursive. And it's this comment, this particular comment, that has made me, it's changed me. It's clearly changed me, because now I just know that I'm going to be talking about, I'm just going to mention the word cursive more than joined up writing, because it actually is easier to say. Even though I have hitherto called it joined up writing, because effectively that's what it was in school, That's what it was in school, and I've always referred to joined up writing as joined up writing, but maybe you'll hear me talk about cursive writing in time. Who knows? But there we go. So this person has changed my language, maybe. Interesting. And then finally, but by no means insignificant, one of my regular commentators have put philosophy plus, I'm going to mark this, philosophy plus experiments equals science. Thanks for sharing. Peace and love. And I think that is a wonderful way of ending this video. Let me see where I am. I've just accidentally switched the video off. But anyway, I was going to do that anyway. I was actually trying to get rid of a comment that had popped up, but we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching, and until my next video, goodbye.